So I'm originally from India, and over here, my mother tongue and the native language I'm supposed to speak is Marwadi. It's this language from the state of Rajasthan, and it kind of hurts me to say it, but I don't know how to read. I don't know how to read or write Marwadi. Like I can speak it because that's how we communicate at home, and I feel like that is down to like somewhat to like me not being like exposed to that sector, like being taught how to read and write, and like it becoming like even back in school over here in India, we don't have like schools that actually promote our national language. Like a lot of the public schools do, but not many private schools do, which like now that you mention everything, and it does make like you need to know the national language really well if you want to succeed in India, but schools over here do not necessarily and like make sure that the students go forward in that direction. But public schools on the other hand do, and I don't know why that disparity is there, but not only the languages, there's like I've noticed that there are like several differences between private and public schools, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that in even the American spectrum, of course. So having taught, several different age groups and in different settings, do you see a disparity between a public school setting and a private school setting? And like, if there is a disparity, does that affect the students' ability to learn effectively?
So that is a really good question. I'm going to start that by saying there's lots of different types of private schools. Okay, especially in a place like New York City, you have Catholic schools that might serve communities, and then you have independent private schools that cost pretty much as your NYU education. So there are very diverse private school experiences. From my experience, it really comes down to issues of funding. Because private schools get so much funding, right? So let's talk about like independent private schools, right? You see them in the city, you see them up in like the North Bronx and out in suburbs. So the funding that those schools get is incredible, which makes things like a student-teacher ratio much smaller and smaller class sizes, which we know from the research, smaller class sizes make for more learning because students get more attention. So the issue is never about the students being better, right? It's about things like smaller class size. It's about resources that might be technology resources. Also, the ability to engage in more creative classes like art and music in private schools really does enhance students' overall learning in everything from reading to math. So if I'm in a private school that has a budget for visual arts and theater arts and movement and music, I'm going to end up better in math than my public school peer who maybe gets music once a week if they're lucky. So it's these funding for things beyond just academics. It is funding for more teachers to make smaller ratios and stronger technology that really we see as enhancing student learning. So like most things, it boils down to capitalism and money, unfortunately, which is why it's so important for us to work for equitable public school funding. As we know, public schools are funded by property taxes, which just enhance their inequity, because then people in communities that have lower property taxes are getting less funding for their schools. So this makes the fight for equitable public schools even more important. But I will say New York City has done a great job in terms of their public school with supporting this idea that students have access and families have access to home language. You will not see signs or even hear issues of, in this school, we speak English only in New York City. And even in like surrounding areas, in many areas, which is a huge step. Because like Nicole said, I mean, not even 30, 40 years ago, like 20 years ago, we were still hearing a big English only movement. But even now, when New York City publishes material, there's a video that all families have to see when their child is labeled an ELL, or as English language learner, what we like to call multilingual learner, because it's more of an additive name, not a deficit. They watch a video, and they watch a video where they learn about bilingual ed versus dual language versus ENL. And even when the families are learning about ENL, English is a new language, the DOE lets them know that home languages are used and supported in ENL classrooms. So I give public school, big props for making these statements. But unfortunately, there is just so much more you can do when you have money. You can hire bilingual paras, right? So a para is a paraprofessional, someone who works usually one-on-one. So if there's a private school and there's a newcomer who speaks Arabic and no one in the building speaks Arabic, there might be discretionary funds to hire a one-on-one tutor or teacher or para for that student's home language, which is just the most beneficial thing that a newcomer student could get.
A little bit of an aside from the multilingual topic, but we actually had the opportunity a couple months ago to speak with also someone in the education space, and I think she was mentioning, I want to say it was a private school, not sure if it was charter or private, but they had actually had multiple resources on campus, such as like something you can see for primary care and some other resources like that, and it made it made the students a lot more engaged, just because they were able to go to just one single place for a lot of different needs, and parents didn't have to take their kid from one place to another place after school for another appointment and here and there. And so having all those resources combined was really like a lifesaver for some of these families. But I kind of wanted to touch upon something you mentioned earlier, how it's never too early to talk to students about these kind of issues, even if they're super young. When me and Yashish were doing research for this episode, we saw one of the resource pages that you had created, and there was an infographic saying, at what age students start to develop different kinds of implicit biases in their thinking and how they view others. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you about that. So educators who work at the primary and secondary level, they might feel that these topics are a bit too sensitive to discuss for younger age groups. So to kind of appease them and kind of help them maybe be a little bit more comfortable with the idea, how might those conversations be started with those younger children?
So first of all, I will say that these are really important conversations to have. It's conversations and actions, right? So a lot of things that young people engage with are beyond just the verbal, but playing. So I always point to things like toys and art. Thinking about the toys that are really young people, like 2, 3-year-olds have. What color are the dolls' faces? What kind of hair do your dolls have? When I think about my own daughter, I think about, do I have dolls that not only look like her with, curly hair and brown skin, but are there dolls that reflect other kinds of people? Thinking about coloring books, what colors are you making accessible to color in faces? Looking at what colors kids choose. And if you have a kid who's always picking an orange or a peach, how can we suggest, what about this tan? What about this brown? Let's think about the people we know. And that's a huge piece also, thinking about the people the people that your child interacts with. Making diverse spaces for young people to be a part of in a community is so important for raising anti-racist children. It's really difficult to talk about race if your child is only ever surrounded with whiteness, right? It's not impossible, but it's different. So how do we make diverse spaces for young people to be a part of and part of communities? How do we make sure that they are in communities that represent the diversity of the larger community and the US? So a lot of these conversations also go into other differences, right? So issues of gender, issues of sexuality and ability. So a lot of the conversations, I like to say, can also be started by children's books. We don't, as parents, have to have all the words. Other people have written amazing books. So for example, having books where Black and students of color are centralized as characters, but the book might not be about race, right? So there's a great book called Jabari Jumps, which is all about a little boy trying to jump off the high board, and he's a young Black boy. So having this kind of idea that diversity is normalized, right? Not every book about a Black person is about Blackness. Some are, but sometimes it's just a story about a brown child and his brown grandma, or stories where language and other languages are normalized. So the book, Julian is a Mermaid. It is a great book about a little boy who wants to dress like a mermaid, right? So it really plays with fighting against gender norms. He lives with his grandma, which is a great intergenerational look. But then his grandmother uses Spanish every so often, and he calls her abuela. So this kind of normalized translanguaging. So there are wonderful books out there to start these topics with kids. There's great read alouds if you can't get to a book, Sankofa read alouds is one of my favorite. There's also a great Facebook, Instagram group or program called Woke Kindergarten. And the host of Woke Kindergarten, they do a great job of putting big ideas like anti-racism or transgender awareness into little kid language, right? Because we can teach kids who are 2 years old, what does it mean that anyone can wear anything they want? That concept a 2-year-old can get, right? You are free to wear what you want. You don't have to say it's because you're a boy or a girl, and you can wear what you want. Or people have different colors of skin, and families have different colors of skin, even within their family. These are concepts that are not too difficult for young people to grasp. It's just about putting it in their language. And oftentimes the kids' books, the internet resources, like we said, the read alouds, Woke Kindergarten, they're really great entry points for this.
Right, even something as simple as getting new kinds of crayons in. It's such something that I think, maybe 20 years ago, I mean, I'm not that old, but even when I was in kindergarten, we had, I think, the peach crayon, but then I kind of go back, and a few years later, I started to see like the multicultural pack crayons of Crayola. And of course, that's such a small thing, but even having those books that centralize different kinds of minorities and have them just be nothing super major and nothing super in depth, but even just having them be a character, I think makes a lot more of a difference than I think we can imagine, but then we'll be able to see that in future generations.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at like what Netflix has to offer now. The shows, the central characters, there's Molly from Denali that focuses on an Indigenous little girl's experiences, and so many shows that infuse Spanish and other languages. There's a lot of media out there. I tell parents all the time, I'm like, you wanting to do this is a great first step. But it doesn't always have to be you like sitting down, having a conversation. It can be like, let's watch this show together, and then we can talk about it. Like, let the media creators be your springboard, and then you can take it from there.
I love that so much. We want to thank you, Dr. Woodley, for taking time out of your day to speak with us and share your insights to the empowered community. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching this episode. Goodbye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.